So welcome, and of course we'll start with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Me.
And here we are, at the place we ended. This tragedy, this incredible tragedy, it really was. I mean, we've had the tragedy of the golden calf, we've had the tragedy of Aaron's sons, and now we have this tragedy. Vayelchu, I'm going to do this verse again. Vayelchu vayavu el Moshe ve'el Haron. They went and they came to Moses and to Aaron, ve'el kol adat b'nei Israel, and to the entire community of the children of Israel, el midbar Paran, to the wilderness or the desert of Paran, Kadesha, towards Kadesh. Here we go on that little thing again. And we'll go to the next page. I think I'm going to. Vayashivu otam davar, and they brought back word to them, ve'et kol ha'edah, and to the entire community. So as Rashi's going to point out, the otam has to, even though we've already talked about the Bnei Israel, this, because we've got it again here, kol ha'edah, this has to mean Moses and Aaron. Vayar et pri haaretz, and they showed them the fruit of the land. Excuse me, I'm going to make a change here. There we go. All right, so let's go back to the Rashi. Vayelchu vayevu, they went and they returned. Mahu vayelchu. So what do you mean they went? If they came, they obviously went. We know they went. We just had a description of how they went into the land of Canaan and scattered it out. Why do we need this word vayelchu? Mahu vayelchu. So what is this vayelchu? Lahakish halichatan leviatan. What it does is it connects their going out, their setting out, to their return. Ma biatan be'etzah. It's going to say Ra'ah, I'm sure, but we'll see. Yep. Just as their setting out was with bad intent, with malicious intent, af halichat, they're returning. Af halichatan be'etzah Ra'ah. So too, when they even set off, right? They there was a bad intent here, bad intent. And I made a little note, as you can see. This is from this other text that I had copied from my actual physical book, okay? And it says, Shebnei Yisrael hechmiru al Moshe l'shoach meraglim la'eretz Yisrael. So when he says Eitzah Ra'ah, he could be referring, I was taking this when I was studying it, even though I can understand Eitzah Ra'ah to mean referring to the spies themselves. But I also understood this as saying that the Eitzah, the initial Eitzah to send spies after God had assured them that they would be successful in their campaign, was also Eitzah Ra'ah. And I tried to think of what the exact Eitzah Ra'ah was, and this is the note that I either got from some other place or was meditating at the time, and saying that the children of Israel made it difficult, put a chumrah on Moses. In other words, they added a level of difficulty to him that he had to send spies, that they forced Moses to send spies. And essentially they did. They as we sort of read in various other places in Deuteronomy, Moses says they came and asked him to do it. They told him to do it. So he then, we've discussed this in a previous session. At any rate, that's the halicha as well as the bi'ah. Vayashivu otam davar. So Rashi clarifies the otam referring to et Moshe ve'et Aharon, and to Moses and Aaron. By the way, I would say that the word davar also, it has a harsh connotation, although it didn't necessarily have that. And la shivotam davar does mean to bring back word. But I can tell you that like vaydaber has a certain, that daber is to speak and amar is to say. And I don't know if you might feel also in the English that there's a little bit of a harsher edge to speaking as opposed to saying. It would be interesting to meditate on that distinction. Why we have two words to describe communicating by speech, anyway. Vaisapru lo, and they told him Vayomru, and they said, Banu el haaretz, we came to the land asher shalachtanu, that you sent us to. V'gam zavat chalav udavashi, and indeed, it flows with milk and honey, right? V'zeh pirya, and this, showing them the fruit, this is their fruit. If you're hearing ambient sounds, I will put this on so that will be better. Give me a moment. How's that? Is that better? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Here we go. Interesting, right? Interesting little observation here. Zavat chalav udvashi. In other words, they're saying to Moses, indeed, it flows with milk and honey. And quoting B'midbar Rabbah, quoting Numbers Rabbah, Rashi tells us, Kol davar sheker, any lie, she'ein umrim bo ktsat emet, which doesn't contain a kernel of truth, betchilato, at its beginning. When you start to tell this lie, if there's a kernel of truth at the beginning, and if it doesn't have it, ein mekayem besofo, people won't ultimately believe it. It won't be established ultimately. So this is this little kernel of truth these people told them, and then of course proceeded to speak disparagingly. So here we go.
I'm confused, and
right.
You don't have to get into this if you don't want to, because it's really not about this Parsha as it is about that phrase. But how in the world can they see that place as being flowing with milk and honey? I know that some of my favorite honey is made in Israel. That's, I'm not denying that. But flowing with milk and honey, what kind of milk?
I think it's a metaphor. It's an idiom. It's not to be taken literally. So as long as we're not taking, in other words, it means it's fertile. Okay. And to me, milk represents sustenance, right? And the honey represents deliciousness. In other words, it's arable land. Compare it to Egypt, which is watered strictly by the Nile, and compare it to what they're traveling through, which is wilderness. And you've been to Israel and you've seen how non-arable so many parts of that area is. There's just, there's not a lot of arable land.
But isn't the water also coming from specific sources that are not unlimited, and through irrigation and things like that from those sources?
The difference is that it says it actually in Deuteronomy, by the way, that Israel is watered from the heavens. The rivers in Israel are not so significant as sources of water, at least originally. Maybe they are more, and but basically the way Egypt is irrigated is absolutely through the Nile and the canals that come from the Nile, and it is a reliable, the spring floods or whatever waters that come from the center of Africa. But Israel is watered differently, and they actually describe this in the Torah. That being able to water your fields from the heavens requires a minimum amount of tircha, right? Whereas having to dig canals and create irrigation systems is far more complex and difficult.
But I thought that's mostly how Israel was watered.
By the heavens. It may be different now.
That's different from my understanding.
Well, nowadays it may be different, Lauren. It may in fact be different. Mm-hmm. I know that they have developed some new ways in which to, develop water sources, etc. up in the Galil. I seem to remember that the last time I was there. They also tried desalinization. Excuse me.
But why would they need to do that if the water was coming from the heavens?
Well, I think they would have felt that it was more reliable. I mean, we know that there's a sense that we are in divine hands when we rely on waters from heaven. And of course, modern technology, they're trying to use it so that they can have, provide more arable land. I mean, part of what Ben Gurion wanted to do, excuse me, sorry, in wanting the desert to bloom was to create arable land. He believed that, that the soil in the Negev simply lacked water, but it was capable of producing, crops. So.
And the Sea of Galilee and the Dead
Yes.
Sea, I know they have some seas there.
Okay, yeah, the Dead Sea, you can't water anything. It's great for chemicals and chemical extraction. By the way, the Dead Sea is like much smaller than it used to be. They have a lot
because
of it.
of desalination and
Correct.
using it for water.
Well, I don't know. The Dead Sea is
I don't
very.
think that water isn't used. It's I think it's because the water sources are a lot of water diverted before it ever gets to the Dead Sea.
Correct. Exactly, Shirabeth.
You can't
the water
take it
doesn't
out
get
of
to
the
it.
Dead Sea.
Right.
But
Exactly.
about halav udvash, I just wanted to say that I think I've read that halav, if you think about like flocks of goats, that's a source of halav, and that's where you get that idea that this is a good land for grazing, which it is in many places. And dvash can mean, I'm not sure if it means it here, but it can mean dates, because dates are sometimes referred to as dvash, because it's and it's a good land for growing dates.
Yeah, I would think they had bees there. Honey,
they do have regular.
They do, and it's so delicious.
You're right, Shirabeth. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying, I'm reading this and I'm seeing, I don't think they're not lying. They're not lying at all. They're maybe bending the truth a bit when they get to the cities are fortified and here are all the people that live there. But then Caleb says, as we get on, we can do this. So I don't see that they're lying. I think that they're just trying to scare people. Well, by telling the truth, which we have all the time in nowadays. We have people who tell us the truth all the time, but they tell it in a way that makes you scared.
So,
and also you might say that the word that's coming up, the word Ephes, have we read Ephes yet? I don't think we got that.
No,
we haven't.
But some people interpret that to mean like, yes, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a good land. And then Ephes means, but that doesn't matter.
Right.
We're never going to get this land.
Right. It means nevertheless. So the lie that they were telling.
It's a very strong word. It's not a word that comes up very much.
Right. It isn't aval. It's sort of,
but forget about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget
it doesn't count. Right. The stuff before doesn't count for anything. No. So Golda, to answer your question, it isn't necessarily that they were lying about facts. You can also lie about how you want to interpret those facts and the importance you give to various elements of this. And they when it says diba, it's to speak disparagingly of the whole enterprise. In other words, what were they doing? They were trying to realign the Israelites' feelings so that they wouldn't bother going in. They were trying to prevent them from entering the land.
It was spin.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's right.
That's the term we need to use for that. It's spin.
Right. And look, it's what they're emphasizing. Right. And Shirabeth, the point that you brought was beautiful. Yes, absolutely. All right, let's keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ephes, however, ki az ha'am, the people are indeed powerful. Hayoshev ba'aretz, who dwell in the land. Okay, az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz. Ve'ha'arim b'tzurot gedolot ma'od, and their cities are fortified and large, very large. Okay. V'gam yelidei ahanak ra'inu sham, and we also saw the offspring of the anak, of giants, we saw there. Okay, let's take a look at Rashi. Okay, Bitsurot. So he says this again, it's not a common word. Bitzurot, says this word Bitzurot, Lashan Chozek. He says it has the connotation of mighty, strong. The Targumo, right? And if we look at the Targum, it has the term krachin, right? So he says that they use the word krachin to describe the Bitzurot. Elashon biraniyot agulot. He says that means it's talking about fortified places that are circular fortified places. Agul is a circle. Ubelashon Arami, and in Aramaic, karich, the word karich means agul. It means turned over. It means round. So that's these cities that are Bitsurot. Amalek Yoshev Be'eretz HaNegev. The tribe of Amalek dwells in the south, in the land to the south. Vahachiti, Vahivusi, and the Hittites and the Jebusites, Va'emori, and the Amorites, Yoshev Bahar, dwell in the mountain. V'haknaani, and the Canaanites, Yoshev al Hayam, they dwell by the sea, V'al Yad Hayardain, and also by the side of the Jordan, next to the Jordan. So basically,
Rabbi,
yes.
they didn't know that these people, the Canaanites and all the others, were shaking in their boots. They didn't know that, but they were weak. They weren't strong, and they just didn't know that. They were afraid of the Israelites invading them. They didn't know that they were afraid. They were afraid of the Israelites, but they didn't know that.
Well, that's important, right? And for sure, we don't want to underestimate our opponents, but that is a fact. And I think, Harlan, what you've said is really cool, especially when you tie it in to the two spies that Joshua sent to Jericho, and where Rachav told them how everyone was in dread of them. So, information is half the battle, or maybe even more than half the battle, just being well informed. So you make an extremely good point. That's not being said, right? The spies, first of all, the spies may truthfully have no idea. There doesn't seem to be an indication that they spoke to anyone. But they also they were showing a lack of faith in God. I mean, when God says you're going to succeed, guess what happens? So unless you mess it up, if you lose faith, if you lack faith, then okay, you won't succeed. But it all is going to depend on how much do you trust God? At any rate, Amalek Yoshev, etc. So they start off by saying Amalek dwells in the south of the land, right? And why do they start off with this Amalek? In other words, Rashi's telling us this was quite intentional. Lefi shenikvu ba'Amalek. They'd already been burned by Amalek. Remember Kvar. And because they'd already had that encounter with Amalek back in Parshat B'Shalach, right? When Moses had to hold up his hands for them to be able to get the better of Amalek. And when he lowered his hands, Amalek would get the better of them. Okay. Kvar hiskiruhu miraglim. They mentioned him already. The spies mentioned him already. Kadei leyirum, in order to cast fear into the Israelites. Al Yad HaYarden, there's the Canaanites. Al Yad HaYarden, near the Jordan, right near the Jordan. Yad Kamashma'o Eitzel HaYarden. So Yad, hand, here, in other words, on the left side, the right side, at any rate, as it implies, Eitzel HaYarden. They live right next to the Jordan River. Velo tuchlu, and you will be unable la'avor, to cross the Jordan. So you've got this natural barrier of the Jordan River, plus you got the Canaanites right on the other side, ready to meet you. So strategically, that puts you in a pretty weak position. So just all kinds of reasons why you're not going to make it. Vayahas Kalev et ha'am el Moshe. And this is, again, a little bit of the syntax here is not the easiest, but it says Kalev, Caleb, silenced the people towards, and El Moshe sounds like against Moses, to Moses, right? And Rashi's going to explain the complicated syntax here. Vayomer, and he said, Caleb said, Alo na'aleh, we absolutely should go on up. Vayarashnu ota.
משכתי בחוץ?
Oh, sorry.
משכתי
Hold on a
בחוץ
second.
הזה?
Hold a second. Hold a second.
לא,
Hold a
אוקיי, לא
second.
חשוב. זה הפעמון שלי.
There we go. Sorry. Let me just take care of that. All right. He says, we will certainly go up and we will inherit it. We will succeed in taking it over. Ki achol nuchala, because we are going to be able to do this. In other words, alo na'aleh means, he says, let's go on up. We need to go on up and to conquer it because we will be successful. And there's a very interesting Rashi on this. Vayahas Kalev. Caleb silenced them. He shtik et kulam. He silenced them all. El Moshe. So this is interesting Hebrew phrase here. To Moses. And this is based now on the Midrash Rabbah. Lishmoa ma sheyedaber Moshe. In other words, what it's saying is he silenced them so that they would hear what he would speak against Moses, right? Savach va'amar, he yelled out and said, V'chi zo bilvad asa lanu ben Amram. And he said, and was this the only thing that Ben Amram did to us? In other words, so they're figuring Hashomea, person who heard him, Hayasavur, they were convinced, Shabbat Saper Begenuto. They were convinced that he was going to come and say something also disparaging about Moses. Or, okay, the spies had said something disparaging against Moses by implication, but Caleb was going to say something specific, about how awful Moses was. Umitoch shahaya belibam, and because now in their hearts, al Moshe, they now felt negatively towards Moses, bishvil divrei hameraglim, because of the words of the spies, of the shatku kulam. They all were silent. They wanted to hear lishmoa genuto, to hear what was going to be said to disparage him. Amar. So Caleb goes on and says, V'halach hara lanu et hayam. He said, well, didn't he split the sea for us? V'horid lanu et haman. Didn't he cause the manna to come down for us? V'higiz lanu et haslav. And didn't he bring the partridges, for us to eat? Alo na'aleh. He says, we certainly should go on up. Afilu bashamayim, even if it was into the heaven, even if he was telling us to mount to heaven, v'hu omer, and he were to say to us, asu sulamot, make ladders, v'alusham, and go on up into the skies. Natzliach b'chol varav. We will succeed.
Rabbi, they got a short memory.
Yeah, well, that's human nature. Harlan, that's human nature. Okay, we will be successful in all his words. He is completely reliable. And Rashi goes on to comment on this word vayahas, and basically he's going to tell us it's like an onomatopoeia. Lashon shtika. This is the word you use to be silent. You go shh. V'chein has kol basar. We have in Zechariah, it says, let all flesh be silent, or silence all flesh. Has kilol haskir, be silent so as not to mention. Kain derech b'nei adam, and so it is the way of a person. Harotzeh l'shatek agudat anashim, who wants to silence a group of people. Omer sht. Okay. And he's got, I think he's got other Sfarim Acherim, other texts say Has. That's what he says. Hush, hush, hush. So, and we will stop here today. I'm going to put in a little arrow, and who knows, maybe next year we will do more. So let me take this down. Let's see if I can. There we go.
We can do more tomorrow.
That's true. God willing, we can.
Not sure, Beth, but
I'm hoping we can. I have to get myself back to Santa Rosa.
Sorry about that noise before. I have a doorbell that I can't tell if it's if someone's ringing my bell or if it's the wind. So I had to run out and check.
It's okay. I just had to mute you. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's actually a cowbell on a string.
Sweet. Okay, I'm stopping the recording.
I find this fascinating. This is really how people work.